Davy. I'm awesome. And welcome to Davy's Awesome Stories, where I tell funny stories from my past or go on a rant in an effort to make you laugh. So this week I'm going to be talking about something that I felt was a little strange in my childhood. My parents, like most parents in that era, didn't have very many restrictions on what we could watch. Mainly because they weren't home as much. I'm a part of the generation that has been dubbed the least parented generation in history. Because as time went on, there was a generation where all the dads just went to work and all the moms stayed home, and it got progressively more and more moms going to work. By the time I was growing up, it was like it is now. The average home has 2 working parents. Kind of has to. So like I said, my parents really didn't have time to concern themselves with what we were watching too much, but sometimes would, and it was always strange. Like, there was no thing of, like, what specifically. They would just pick weird things that we weren't allowed to watch. That later, growing up and thinking about it, it didn't make a lot of sense. For example, when I was a kid, there was this movie that my parents absolutely forbid us to watch called Reckless. You've probably never heard of this movie? There's a reason for that. It didn't do that well because it wasn't that good. Here was the thing, though. I was like 4 or 5. They told me, you guys can't watch this movie, so I didn't watch the movie. I found out years later that my brother did anyway, but I didn't. It was later in life. I was in my early mid-20s. DVR had just become a thing, and I was scrolling through looking for things on my DVR to record and watch later, and I saw the movie Reckless. And I said, wow, that's the movie my parents wouldn't let me see. So I decided to go ahead and record it and watch it later. And I kind of wish I didn't do that. Not because it was bad like my parents had made out, but this movie was freaking boring. Like, I would have been more entertained watching laundry fling around in a dryer than watching this movie. But I remember when I was a kid asking my parents, like, what's wrong with this movie? Why can't I watch it? My mom told me, it's got too much adult stuff in it. I.e., it has nudity. And watching this later as an adult, they were right. It had nudity. One scene. One brief scene. Probably lasted about 10 seconds. But okay, I know most parents aren't comfortable with their kids seeing nudity. My brother had seen this, and he agreed it was terrible. And as much as my brother gets on here and likes to laugh and giggle about nude scenes and whatnot, even he has told me that the brief nude scene in this movie was not worth watching the entire movie. Now, what gets me about this was that my brother and I were told we can't watch the movie Reckless because of one brief nude scene. Yet the same year that Reckless came out, we saw the movie The Terminator. Which, don't get me wrong, it's one of my favorite movies. Second one was way better. Third one was okay, and then after that it all just became crap. Like, seriously, please stop making Terminator movies. But the first Terminator, my brother and I loved it. And later in life, it kind of got to me after watching Reckless, like, okay, this came out the same year as The Terminator. I watched The Terminator the same year you said no to watching this. The Terminator has a lot of violence. I understand as a 4-year-old not wanting me to see nudity, but The Terminator had violence. A lot of violence. Blood. And yes, it also had a nude scene. A nude scene that really didn't show less nudity than Reckless. So it confused me. Terminator good, Reckless bad. I mean, if we're talking about quality of a movie, Terminator good, Reckless bad. But why would you object to one and not the other? Another thing that was strange to me is my brother and I, growing up, one of our favorite places to go ever was the video store. If my mom came in and said, hey, guess where we're going, guys? The video store. That made our night. Heck, depending on what day it was, made our entire weekend. Just, yay, video store! Wasn't like we didn't go very often. We went all the time. My brother and I, we were such movie buffs. We loved movies so much that going to the video store got us as excited as saying, hey, you're going to Chuck E. Cheese or Toys R Us. Only thing probably more exciting was you're going somewhere like Magic Mountain or Knott's Berry Farm. However, this was another crazy thing about us. They could take us to Knott's Berry Farm for the entire day, and at the end of the day, we'd still be like, hey, you know what would be a great way to end the night? A trip to the video store. One of the things that could ruin that, though, was when they would tell us, we're only getting one movie this time, so you and your brother have to agree on one. Oh, Mom! We hated having to agree on movies. Because even though Josh and I growing up did like a lot of the same movies, There was also plenty of movies we didn't agree on, or there was just movies that he wanted to see that I didn't, or we just weren't in the mood to see the same kind of movie. So it would lead to fights because we couldn't agree on something because we could only get one movie. That's madness! Only one? My brother would usually want a horror movie, and I did not like horror movies growing up. I'd usually want some B-rated martial arts movie. He was okay with some of them, but wasn't that into them. But we did come to an agreement on this one trip. One thing him and I always mutually loved, were always mutually down for, was a good superhero, vigilante, masked hero type movie. Something like that. And we saw a copy, a really old copy, of The Lone Ranger. This was way before the Johnny Depp one came out. But my parents said no. They said, no, it's too violent. If you've seen those old Lone Ranger movies, you're laughing your butt off right now. Because violent, again, later when I was in my teens, saw that it was on, decided to watch it. Back in that day, it wouldn't have been rated PG. Like, it was made in the day before they rated movies, but still, like, it would have been, like, G-rated. Except for the fact that they said shucks a couple too many times. But they wouldn't let us watch it. However, in the same trip, another one Josh and I agreed on because we'd heard about it, saw a little bit of it, and wanted to see it, and they said okay to, was the cartoon movie Heavy Metal. And like us, if you've seen this movie, you're like, whoa, that movie was definitely not for children. But then again, it was in the children's section because back then, it was an animated movie and everybody just kind of looked at it like, oh, it's a cartoon, it's for kids. It is definitely not for kids. I personally would not let my kids watch this movie because my main thing when I'm thinking about whether or not to let my kids watch certain things is the psychological impact it might have on them. It's not so much the violence, it's not so much nudity, but how does this movie play with your mind psychologically? As a kid, I'm going to tell you, they probably shouldn't have let us watch Heavy Metal. Didn't make us psychos or anything, but I will admit, there's some nutty stuff in this. Come to find out years later, why did they not let us watch The Lone Ranger? Wasn't because it was too violent. It's because they didn't want to have to sit there and watch it. Which I kind of get that. There's plenty of movies that my kids wanted to watch that made me want to put a bullet in my head. But I just deal with it. As far as like if they wanted to watch the newer Lone Ranger, the one with Johnny Depp, fine, just do it when I'm out of the room. Because that movie was crap. But to give you one more example of my parents and what we weren't allowed to watch versus what we were allowed to watch. It was another day, my parents had made us the happiest kids in the world by saying, hey, let's go to the video store. And not only that, but we each got to pick a movie. He'd get to go rent whatever he wanted. I'd get to rent whatever I wanted. Both my brother and my first pick got told no. It was shut down, not doing it. My brother wanted to rent A Nightmare on Elm Street. My mom said, no, it's too scary, even for you. And it wasn't. My brother saw his first Nightmare on Elm Street a year or two later. It was Freddy's Dead, against my parents' wishes, but he was fine. I wasn't. I had nightmares, but he was fine. Me, on the other hand, the movie I wanted to rent the movie Cobra, which at the time they said, no, it's too violent. You can't watch Cobra. I later did behind their back anyway, but I wasn't supposed to. But then what they did let us rent. My brother rented Poltergeist, and my mom watched it with him. She was okay with Poltergeist, which I don't really care about either one. My kids both love horror movies. Some I won't let them watch. Again, the psychological thing behind it. But most I don't really care about. I don't know if I'd have a problem with them watching Poltergeist. They've seen A Nightmare on Elm Street. Even the remake. Shouldn't have let them watch that one because that just crushed their hopes and dreams. And as far as me, I couldn't rent Cobra. It was too violent. So instead, I rented Predator 2. If you have not seen Predator 2, it's like Predator 1, but actually more violent. It's actually the most violent of the series. That was okay, though. They saw Predator. They liked Predator. I could rent Predator 2. So I kind of one day had to just confront my mom about this stuff. Like, look, the stuff you would let us watch versus the stuff you wouldn't let us watch, just admit it. It wasn't about what was good or bad for us. It was about whether or not you wanted to watch it. Of course, they denied it. They just said they misjudged certain things. My thing is, though, is I'm not here to tell you parents to let your kids watch everything. I don't. I'm not telling you to let them watch almost nothing. I don't do that either. But ultimately, it does come down to you're the parent. You decide what they can or can't watch. If you want to be one of those parents who's like, no, sorry, you can't watch anything more violent than the sound of music, then you go for it. If you want to be those parents who allow them to watch anything, that's up to you too. But whichever one you do, just remember, be consistent. So there you have it. That's my story review this week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure to hit like, hit subscribe, hit the little bell so you get notifications for when I post my videos, and leave a comment. Tell me what you weren't allowed to watch versus what you were allowed to watch. Love you guys.